Thank you for that intro. I'm glad everybody stood up. Now you seem a little bit more awake. I just want to get a little bit of a gauge of who's in the audience. So I know we're mostly talking to high school students. So who here is 12 years old or under? Are we down at that? All right, nice. 12 years old or under. Who here is 18 years old or older? Okay, cool. I just wanted to get kind of an impression of where we were. So my name's Matt. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, a little bit about how I got to do what I'm doing. I love that right before me was that Henry Ford quote. There's a lot of real relevance in that quote, especially in what we're doing, because most people that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, I would say, do not yet know that they need a blockchain. And it's our job to convince them that they need one. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing at work, what our company does. But first I wanted to tell you about how I got here. And I think it's particularly relevant because I shouldn't have gotten here. I don't have the background to be where I am. I don't have the skills to be doing what I'm doing. So it's kind of an unconventional path that got me here. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that when they start thinking about, at your age, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was 30. I didn't know what I needed to study, if I was going to go to university, if I wanted to go to college, what were the right skills, what was the difference between a philosophy degree and an engineering degree. None of this stuff was explained to me. I want to just walk you through a little bit of my story to tell you that, whatever path you end up going down, whatever decisions you make in the next few years, there's a way for entrepreneurship and, the world of tech to become a real opportunity for you as you guys get older. And quite frankly, right now also. So my background is I went to high school here in Toronto. I decided to study very generically Bachelor of Commerce. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went to business school. When I started business school, I also didn't know what was the difference between marketing and human resources and organizational behavior and accounting. Realized that I had a particular affinity for numbers, so I ended up focusing on accounting. Fast forward a couple of years, I was an accountant. I didn't plan on being an accountant. I don't think I'm particularly cut out to be an accountant, but I became an accountant. I ended up working at Deloitte, big, large accounting firm, became a chartered accountant, and immediately wanted to blow my brains out. It's just this awful, dry, boring, whatever. But hard skills, right? You're learning something that's kind of relevant and important when you start building companies. But then, I started to get really interested and passionate about Bitcoin. This is back in 2011, 2012. I know you heard from Anthony earlier, and there's very few people in the world that have the same authority to speak about Bitcoin and Ethereum as Anthony do, so I won't repeat what he said. But the interest that originally got me into Bitcoin and the background I had working for a massive, large-scale accounting firm and also technology consulting firm gave me this kind of window into this opportunity that nobody was talking about yet. In 2012, when people talked about Bitcoin, it was really like online gamers. They were saying, hey, I've got like a World of Warcraft account and I want to sell some of my stuff to somebody and I can do that with Bitcoin. And that's, a lot of what the early interest was coming from the gaming community. So obviously big companies around the world were not paying attention to this because it just didn't seem relevant to them. But what I did as a job is I went into companies with other people that I worked with, and we would look at their finances, we'd look at their balance sheets and income statements, things that maybe you've learned about, maybe you haven't. And we'd give confidence to people that what they were writing down in their accounting systems was accurate, that they weren't lying, that they weren't being fraudulent, that they weren't stealing money from their shareholders. This was the role of an accountant, and an auditor. So it kind of dawned on me when I started focusing on what Bitcoin was that maybe that wasn't necessary. Maybe if I could create a system where all transactions that were recorded were like inherently honest, could not be changed, maybe the role that I was playing, my job, was unnecessary. And then you kind of fast forward that and you think about like the massive implication that might have on an entire industry. And then we stepped back a little further and we said, well, if this could have that impact on my industry, what impact could this have on every industry? And that's kind of what started my process down this path. I wrote a letter to my CEO at Deloitte. And for context, Deloitte is a 250,000 person company. I wrote a letter to my CEO and I said, essentially, long story short, I said, Bitcoin is going to make auditors unnecessary. And 30% of your business is auditing. So we should do something about this. This was in 2012. One way or another, I was already so bored of accounting, I had decided that I was going to leave Deloitte. So I figured if my CEO gets annoyed with me, pissed off, doesn't matter, I'm quitting anyways. But quite the opposite is I got a great reception to that. I got an honest and very interested and keen interest from leadership on our firm to say, well, tell us more about this. So I left my role as an accountant. I started focusing on studying Bitcoin. They gave me some money. I started hiring a few developers, and we started playing around with the software at Deloitte. We were saying the premise was show us that this could remove the need for auditors and accountants in the future. So we started doing some experimentation and little things like that, trickling around with what is a blockchain and how does it apply to businesses. I did that for about 2 years, realized that I really wanted to take this one step further. I had never done anything in entrepreneurship. I'd never started a company. I didn't quite know if I had the skills to do this. I started looking around for who could I actually align myself with that's got the skills that I don't have. So I'm very financially savvy. I have an accounting background. I tend to be very business oriented, but I'm not an engineer. I can't write software. I don't have any money. So how do I solve these individual problems? So I found today the guys who are now my two co-founders. We decided to leave Deloitte, start a company, and kind of fast forward, we're doing what we're doing now. So, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but before I get there, I want to just kind of focus in on a couple of things. I had heard a lot of times over the course of my upbringing that I needed to figure out what I was passionate about and do it. And I think that's absolutely important. What I realized in the process, though, is that a lot of things I was passionate about seemed kind of irrelevant. Or I wasn't very good at them. I was passionate about basketball, but I was a terrible basketball player. So I try to narrow down, if I only do what I'm passionate about, is that going to lead me to the success I want in my life? And what kind of became obvious to me over the course of the last few years is that passion is absolutely critical, but it's only one of three things. And those three things in my mind are find something you're passionate about, find something that you're good at and potentially better than others at, and find something that other people value. And then if you have those three things, you've probably got the crux of something that you can do that's going to be impactful and change something. If you only have one or two of those things, you're probably going to find yourself in a place where you're good at something and somebody wants to pay you a salary, but you're not passionate about it, or you're passionate about something, but other people are better than you at it, so you're just not going to win that race. And then you end up in all these kind of scenarios. So if you just kind of focus in on these three things and say, what am I passionate about, what am I good at, and what do other people value? And then, that's kind of the summary of what a lot of successful businesses kind of boil down to when they look at the founders of these companies and they have these three characteristics for the most part. So, the other thing that I realized early on is that I was relatively young. I started my company when I was 27 years old, which, maybe sounds ancient to you guys, but, and I didn't have the money to do it, and I didn't have the experience of building a company before. So I wanted to go out and find advisors that had gone down this path. People that would be willing to invest in us, people that would be willing to kind of teach us the ropes of what does it mean to hire people? What does it mean to open a bank account for a company? Things that I had just never done before. So, very critical to the start of our company was not only having the right skills, but also having the right circle of people around us that we could kind of turn to for advice. So if you're in the process of kind of rumbling around with ideas, you guys probably have an incredible number of awesome ideas. First thing I would do is I'd encourage you to go find somebody who's as passionate about you as about that idea, and then go find somebody who can advise you. So that's kind of what got me to starting my company. Now, what do we do? What is Nuco? And I'm glad the logo's up there because I wasn't going to have any slides, but that weird little icon that I have beside my company name is a platypus. And that's kind of the last lesson I was going to leave you with, is make sure you have fun. So we actually branded our company because my favorite joke is about a platypus. And that's the only reason that our logo is a platypus. So have fun with what you do. Don't take yourself too seriously. So we're a blockchain company. We're based here in Toronto. We're about 20 people, growing to about 25 in the next 2 or 3 months. We do blockchains primarily for big companies. And as the earlier quote was, 2 years ago when I started talking to big companies didn't know what a blockchain was or didn't know that they needed one. Now the rhetoric is changing a little bit. We're starting to realize that people are willing to have these conversations, willing to invest a little bit of money. But what we're really doing is we're looking at the way companies are built and the business models that they operate on. And many, many, many companies in the world can kind of articulate their business models really, really simply. And their business models are, I connect people and I charge them for it. And by connecting people, I can charge a fee, right? And that's banking, that's insurance, that's legal, that's manufacturing. That's many, many industries around the world. They connect buyers and sellers. They connect, lenders and borrowers. They connect all these people, and then they charge a fee in the middle. So if we were going to pitch this concept of a blockchain to them, we had to first tell them that these business models were wrong. And that's a tough conversation to have when you're going up to a senior person in a big company and say, all that stuff you've been doing for 100 years, it probably won't work 100 years from now. It probably won't work 10 years from now. So how are you going to reimagine and redesign your business? And what technology are you going to need to implement that. So that's kind of how a lot of our conversations start. So what we do at Nuco is we build these blockchain systems. We build this infrastructure that allows us to go into a customer, and I'll give you some examples, and say, well, you used to do it with this guy sitting in the middle, connecting all these people, and now you can do it where these people can all connect directly to each other. And now you got to figure out, what is that guy who used to be in the middle, what is he doing now? What does that role in that industry look like? And in many cases, it changes dramatically. So, what I learned in my time at Deloitte that I still carry with me is I learned this kind of, we used to use this terminology when we talk to clients. We used to talk about zooming in and zooming out of your business. And zooming out meant step out of your day-to-day and zoom out and look at a 20-year timeline and say, well, what do I do today? And what will I do in 20 years? And many companies, if they do that exercise, they realize that what they do today and what they're going to do in 20 years is going to be very different. So I'll give you an example. If you are a car company, today you sell cars to families. Families want 2 or 3 cars, and that's great. You zoom out 20 years, and you have to ask the question, do people still want 2 or 3 cars? Do they even want 1 car? Are they still driving? Are they flying? Are they teleporting? Who knows, right? Like 20 years from now, there's going to be a very different reality than today. So then that's the zoom out, right? Zoom in is, now I know what zoom out is, and I have to zoom in and figure out what do I do about it. I have to figure out, if I'm not going to sell 3 cars to every family, then what does that mean to my business model? If I'm not going to, if gas is not going to be the fuel that fuels my car anymore, then what am I going to do about that? Because now we're powering cars with electricity. And this is true across most industries today. Everybody's going through this kind of big buzzword we call disruption. And some of them are really obvious, Ubers and taxis. Some of them are really not obvious. Last week or 2 weeks ago, the CEO of Volvo said, the moment we have autonomous cars, we won't require that our drivers get insurance. That's cool, but that means there's an entire car insurance industry that's going to go out of business because people pay them to get insured. And this is like one decision at one part in one industry that's going to have this ripple effect across the world. So there's tons of this stuff going on, and what we're really kind of pitching to our client base is that blockchains are actually a core part of that future state. What we've done over the last 20 years is we've kind of digitized the world and onboarded everybody onto the internet, and we've done it in a very non-secure way. We've done it with a huge reliance on intermediaries. We've done it with these data centers that capture everybody's information and store them behind like spikes and moats and all sorts of perimeter defenses that we build. And then every once in a while, you'll read the paper or you'll hear your parents talking about the fact that somebody stole my credit card information because Home Depot didn't properly secure my information, or whatever the case might be. So we've built this like massively complex industry and economy on very, very insecure technology. So blockchains are our opportunity to change that. So we go into these companies and we say, let's re-architect how you've done everything. Let's forget about what you've done for the last 50 years and let's think about how you should be doing it for the next 50 years. And we think that's decentralized. And we think that that essentially allows you to redesign these systems in a more secure way. So we've been doing pretty well with that. We've been doing about 1.5 years of projects with big banks, with the Toronto Stock Exchange, with big health data aggregators, big supply chain companies who've been doing some work in pharmaceutical. All of these guys have very similar problems. They have problems around like non-secure data, too much reliance on intermediaries, expensive processes, and they all want to think about how they rebuild that. So that's kind of the crux of what our core system is. For those of you who maybe missed the earlier conversation with Anthony, or if you haven't looked into what a blockchain is, essentially what we're saying is if I had a group of 100 companies or 100 people or 100 random endpoints, and I wanted to connect them, my first order of business, and I have to make sure that they always are constantly communicating with each other, and they're always constantly in agreement with each other. So another simple example. Who knows what Interac is? Interac rings a bell. Interac e-transfer, you guys email money to each other? Is something that's, okay, good. Not sure what high school students are doing these days. So Interac e-transfer is a perfect example. We have all the big banks in Canada. They want you to be able to send money to your friend. They don't know how to do that, so they bring Interac in. Interac sits in the middle of this process. So you've got RBC, you've got TD Bank, you've got Bank of Montreal, and in the middle of all these guys, you have Interac. And Interac says, well, if you send a transaction from RBC and you want to send it to somebody at Bank of Montreal, Interac will see that message. They'll record that transaction. They'll tell RBC that you owe $10, and they'll tell BMO that you have $10 coming from RBC. And they'll maintain that ledger of information. And everybody trusts that Interac is doing a good job at that. And for the most part, they are doing a good job at that. Until Interact gets attacked, or Interact becomes insufficient for the volume of transactions. And again, I'm not sure how many of you pay rent, but on June 30th of this year, Interact crashed for 4 days. And on June 30th is when people are paying rent for July 1st. And all of a sudden, we had this massive standstill in like peer-to-peer payments in Canada because we also heavily rely on Interact, and their system went down. Whereas what we could do today using a system like a blockchain is we could allow all of these banks to sit on a network where they are constantly in agreement with each other. And what they couldn't do before is they couldn't trust each other. So they couldn't say, well, I've got an RBC account and you've got a BMO account, and I trust that when I write down $100, you're writing down negative $100. So that's why they brought in Interact. But now we can create this blockchain system that essentially allows them to constantly be in consensus. So they always are in agreement as to who owes who money, or who owns what asset, or whatever the case might be on this common system called a blockchain. So that's like the very high-level crux of what we've built. Now, a little bit about the second project that Navid kind of alluded to, Aeon, is our current major focus. Is we're realizing that what used to be a conversation 3 years ago would be, is there only going to be one blockchain in the world? And is it only going to be Bitcoin? Or maybe there's going to be 2 blockchains in the world, and there's going to be Bitcoin and Ethereum. And what we've realized over the last 2 years or so is that there's actually been thousands of blockchains getting created. And we think there's going to be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these blockchains that get created. Some that are going to get created publicly for global use. Some are going to get created within specific industries, and they're going to get restricted access for only companies in that industry, and they're going to have very specific purposes. But generally speaking, we're going to see thousands and thousands and thousands of these blockchains. So that kind of led us to ask, well, it's great if I can transact on a blockchain, but what if I want to transact on 2 blockchains? All of a sudden, I know something's happening on this network, and I know something's happening on this network, but these networks don't talk to each other, so I probably need to create a new intermediary that sits into the middle. And then we ask ourselves, well, wasn't the whole point of the blockchain to get rid of intermediaries? And now we've just created new intermediaries. So if you've touched cryptocurrencies in your life, I've heard that many of you are into the crypto mining game, or you're buying little bits of Bitcoin or whatever you're doing in your spare time, which is very cool. You probably have realized that you have to use exchanges or wallets or whatever. These exchanges and wallets are kind of the new form of intermediary. We said, hey, we wanted to build a technology that allows us to rely less on banks, but instead let's rely on cryptocurrency exchanges. But if you really think about it, they're not that different. You're giving somebody your money and they're storing it for you. And so we wanted to zoom out and say, well, what if I could just eliminate any need for intermediaries? So we started developing Aeon. And Aeon is essentially our project today that allows us to connect thousands and thousands and thousands of blockchains to each other. A common communication language that essentially allows blockchains to exchange transactions between each other and verify data across each other. So that as these networks get built around the world, we have some sort of common framework for them all to talk to each other. So that's kind of the crux of what we're building with Aeon. It's an early project. We started about 4 or 5 months ago. And it's going to be several years of development. And as we develop it, the blockchain industry is going to change dramatically. But we really want to focus on like creating this kind of base language for blockchains to talk to each other. So that's a little bit about Aeon. I want to tell you a little bit about our team. But before I do that, I wanted to stop and see if anybody has questions, because I kind of covered a bunch of stuff. But if you have any questions about blockchains or cryptocurrencies or whatever, yeah. Sure, yeah. So this is why we're so excited about it, because what really excites me is, you're probably familiar with the term database, right? What a database is. What really excites me is the generic use of a blockchain, just as we have like very generic use of a database. So, think about opening Microsoft Excel and saying, hey, I'm going to type into Excel all of my friends' names and all of my friends' phone numbers and all of my friends' birthdays. I could do that. I could also go into Excel and I could type in my bank account balance and my credit card balance and all this stuff. So the underlying system doesn't really care what that information is. The underlying system just says, this is where you're going to store information, and here's how it's going to be stored, and here's how you're going to achieve agreement on it. So we've seen a lot of the early interest was obviously financial. It was, hey, Bitcoin looks like a payments technology, so how do we apply that into payments technologies? But we're starting to see a lot more work being done in other domains. So we've got healthcare projects ongoing, we've got insurance projects ongoing, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is very broad. And what becomes kind of cool is when you start thinking about how these things touch each other. And this is where Aeon becomes really relevant in our mind. Is if I think about walking into a hospital in a country that doesn't have health insurance and I get a procedure done. Let's say I have an operation, And all of a sudden, I need to verify if that operation is covered by an insurance policy. And if it is, I need that operation, I need to get paid for it, right? Because I've put money out to pay for the operation. So my medical file might be on a blockchain that's managed by hospitals and medical authorities. My insurance contract might be managed on a blockchain that's made for insurers, where they're managing kind of the rules of my insurance policy. And the payment might be managed on a blockchain that's backed by like the Central Bank of Canada. So all of these things at some point is like, well, something happened, and then I want it to verify something else, and then I want it to trigger something else. So this is like some of the use cases that we're starting to play around with when it comes to like talking between blockchains. Yeah, back there. Yeah, yeah, you. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, and Bitcoin's kind of already started doing that a little bit, but I think the move is actually kind of in the other direction. I think, what used to be true 200-300 years ago is you had very local currencies. You had currencies that were issued in cities and currencies that were issued by a single bank, and it was like very localized, and it became inefficient because you had all these different processes for issuing currencies. And what we're seeing now is we're actually seeing the creation of like thousands and thousands of currencies. We're in the process of developing our own